Hi, everyone. Welcome to the April 30th edition of the TimeformUs forecast. I'm David Aragona. I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. Well, it's the last week in April, which means that May is right around the corner. And typically we'd be talking about the Kentucky Derby at this time of year in normal times, but these are not normal times. We're only racing at a few major tracks in the country at this point in time, Oaklawn being one of them, and they moved the Arkansas Derby from the beginning of last month now to early May. So we'll be talking about that race, actually two races, because they've split this Arkansas Derby into two divisions. That's taking place on Saturday along with the Oaklawn Handicap. We'll all in all discuss 7 races from that Saturday Oaklawn card. But we'll begin by talking about a race that's actually taking place tomorrow as we tape this podcast on Thursday. On Friday, they're running the Grade 3 Fantasy, and this whole race is basically serving as a stand-in for the Kentucky Oaks because it's only a Grade 3 event, but the Fantasy has drawn a lot of the top fillies from around the country. And I'm looking forward to discussing all these races with you, Craig, because there are some full fields, I think all full fields, as that 14-race card on Saturday just has basically a packed starting gate in every single race.
Yeah, it's quite the handicapping challenge, as we talked about on the Pacecast on Tuesday, and just good, strong, deep fields. It's not the Derby in the Oaks, but it's probably not the worst alternative. I mean, sure, we'd all like to be back to normal and have those, but since this is what we have, I'm not going to complain because these are some really good races and drew some really good horses in for the card.
No, I agree with that. We always like to discuss top-level racing, and that's what we have this weekend. Let's jump right into the handicapping because there's a lot to talk about. As I said, we'll begin on Friday with that Grade 3 Fantasy. It's one of 2 stakes races taking place on Friday. They're both for 3-year-old fillies, but the main event is the 9th race, that Fantasy, going a mile on the 16th. This one has drawn a field of 14 horses, so if they all participate, we'll have a full starting gate for this one. The favorite is likely to break from the inside, that being the number 2, Venetian Harbor. She's making her first start since early February, so coming off about a 3-month layoff here. There's no question that she has a speed figure advantage, if you're looking at the TimeformUs numbers in particular, coming into this race, because she ran one of the fastest preps, if not the fastest prep that we saw in the Las Virgenes last time, handled the 2 turns that day. This is a much bigger class test for her, though. Wouldn't you agree?
I would. As you said, I think any analysis of the race has to start with her. She's the speed of the race. She draws inside. She has the best speed figures, but I don't think she's a lock in this spot by any means. She's likely to face some other pressure. She's facing horses of the ability she hasn't seen before, and she's facing a big field, which she hasn't seen a whole lot of when she was running out in Southern California. And I think the first horse we have to talk about when it comes to her is Lake Avenue, because I think she is really the key to the race and how she's ridden. If she goes up and presses Venetian Harbor, as she probably should, then it could make things very tough for her. Lake Avenue is a talented filly in her own right. She's not one I actually am liking in this spot because of Venetian Harbor. I think she's kind of in a bad spot where she either has to press that one or try to outrun her, and I don't think that's an easy task, or rate like she did last time, and we saw that didn't work out very well at Gulfstream. But I do think she's the key. As I say, she's the one who's going to determine just how quick this pace is. There's others in here. We have British Idiom, who is the 2-year-old juvenile filly winner and the Eclipse champion of that division. But she's not one I'm particularly interested in. I'm going to try to beat her for sure. She didn't run particularly well last time. She can certainly win the race, but at a short price, as our buddy Andy Serling would say, where is her fast race?
Yeah, I feel like you can say that about a lot of these horses. Aside from Venetian Harbor, once you get past her, a lot of these horses have just run speed figures. If you're looking at the TimeformUs numbers, barely breaking into the low 100. Some of them have gone above 105, but not too many of them, and most of them not more than one time. So I don't know if Venetian Harbor takes a step backwards, which, I mean, is no guarantee. I know we're both going to be a little bit against her in this race, but I don't think that anybody's going to have to step up to run exceptionally fast, at least compared to historical averages for Grade 1 races that 3-year-old fillies would be running in May, to win this race. So I agree. I think this race is actually open to a lot of horses, including some bigger prices. I agree with your take on Venetian Harbor. This is a big step up in class. I think, as you said, Lake Avenue is likely to use different tactics this time, because I would imagine even her connections realize that they probably made the wrong choice last time. I don't know if that was the plan to rate or if Joao Rosario just made a decision on the fly, but I think that they squandered an opportunity to get a graded stakes victory last time. And that's really the problem with Lake Avenue is while she does have ability, she also is facing other speed in this race. And I feel like last time was the time that you wanted to have her if she had gotten the right trip. It didn't work out. And she's not necessarily going to get that same situation again where there wasn't a whole lot of pace in that race. So I also was going to go in a different direction. British Idiom, yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add. I mean, she hasn't run that fast. I guess that she can improve second off the layoff, but you're not going to get much of a price on her either. So I'll use her defensively just like I will Venetian Harbor, but I think you can look at some others in this race. I have a feeling we're going to be on a similar page here because I'm sure you know that I like the number 5 Harvey's Low Goyle. She's a horse that I've been following really since the start of her career when she ran deceptively well against a bias in that turf race at Aqueduct last year. Her 2 starts on the dirt, she's won them so easily. I know that she hasn't run the fastest numbers, kind of like everybody else in this race. You can sort of lump her into that same category, but I was impressed by her 2-turn dirt race last time in the Busanda. We talked about how the pace of that race shaped up, and we recapped it on the TimeformUs Pacecast, that she made a big middle move into a slow pace, or into a moderate pace, I should say, that day, really broke the race open midway through. She finished it off at the end. I probably would prefer 1 1/8 for her to the 1 1/16 that she's going here, but she's going to get pace to close into. And if she's anywhere near that 12-1 morning line, I just can't resist her.
Yeah, she's my top pick in here as well. I actually like a couple, but she's the first one. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on her because you covered her pretty well. It is interesting to note that Wooder White, who was well beaten second in that race, came back to win the Busher next time out at a big price. So I have no doubt it was just a legit strong effort from her. The other that interests me is She Dares the Devil, the 7 horse in this field. She's got a little more tactical speed, I think. Harvey's Little Goyle. She might be able to sit up close, save a little more ground. So those are the 2 for me. I think the pace is going to be hot. I'm like you with Venetian Harbor. I'm certainly not tossing her. It wouldn't shock me at all if she won this race. She's obviously very talented, but I think you got to go against a short price like that. And I just don't like British Idiom at all. I probably won't even have her on my tickets.
The other long shot that I would try to get in there is the number 11 Fire Coral for Steve Asmussen, one of the few that he has in here. She just feels like a filly to me. Although she's lightly raced, kind of like Harvey's Low Goyle, she's coming into this race at a time when it feels like she's just finding herself. I wasn't super impressed with her maiden victory 2 back, but it felt like she took a big step forward to win that optional claiming race last time. That's turned out to be a pretty solid race as the runner-up came back to be that good second to Edgeway last week. Jilted Bride, the 3rd place finisher, is okay. The 4th place finisher, Piece of My Heart, is one of the major players in the Gardenia that's taking place before this. And it just feels like Fire Coral is one that's getting good right now. And I don't want to ignore an improving 3-year-old that has that room for improvement. So if she's going to be a big price, double digits, close to 15-1, she's one I'm going to try to get into the exotics behind my top pick, or perhaps even put a saver win place bet on her because she's going to be a big price.
Yeah, I've got no problem with her being by curling out of an APND mare. You would certainly expect her to keep getting better as time moves on.
Let's move on to Saturday, where we're going to discuss 7 of these races, obviously all of the stakes races later on, but let's begin with the 5th race. It's an optional claiming, 75,000 conditioned allowance, going 1 1/16 on the dirt. And the focus of this race is really towards the outside. The 2 runners that are drawn in post 11 and 12, they do figure to vie for favoritism. Pirates Punch, I think, is probably the key to this race because he's run some massive TimeformUs speed figures recently, but you can argue that he's done so against weaker fields than he's meeting here, and he might face some pace pressure from the horse that's breaking on the inside and perhaps others.
Yeah, I agree. The pace projector pegs this as one likely to have a fast pace. This is a race that could easily be a listed stakes or even a grade 3, given the field that it drew. The quality's that well. I bet there's a few of them wishing they had shipped a Fawner yesterday after watching Sleepy Eyes Todd destroy a field in a $50,000 race. A lot of these could have easily been very competitive in there in what was probably a much, much easier spot for what they're running here, just a little bit more money. I'm not sure I want Pirates Punch as a likely favorite with that outside post and other speed signed on. I'm going to go back to my old favorite Bankit in here. I think he ran very well last time. He just lost to two better horses. He was in against Tom's d'Etat, of course. And I don't remember who the runner-up was now, but it was somebody who I know is better than Bankit. And I think he's the horse to beat at that 9-2 morning line. There's a whole lot of horses in here that can win, but if I was looking for a real off-the-type pace horse other than Bankit, I would actually prefer Rated R Superstar over Endorsed. Endorsed is one I'm just not that big of a fan of. I don't get the 7-2 morning line, really. We'll talk about the big cap at Santa Anita later when we talk about Combatant, but it seems like the morning line maker might be overrating that race a little bit, where that one finished fifth. So I like the draw for Rated R Superstar. He draws inside. He's always coming late. So if he does get a good pace to run into, he's certainly going to be the one I'd want flying.
Yeah, I don't quite agree with your take on Endorsed here. I actually think Endorsed is the horse to beat, and he's my top pick in this race. I like this horse quite a bit. I've always thought he had ability, and he's one of the more lightly raced members of this field. So I think you could say that he still has some upside now as a 4-year-old because he's had some stops and starts in his career. It's worth remembering that this horse was really impressive in a debut going 6 furlongs. He came back as a 3-year-old, his first start of last year, going 6 furlongs, and he beat a good field of sprinters and went 108-3. And for whatever reason, when they've tried top company with this horse, they've tried to do so going 1.25 miles. Well, what's to say that he really wants to go 1.25 miles? I know he ran fine in the Travers and he ran his best speed figure ever, but perhaps he was just getting good at that time. I actually think 1.16 miles is a perfect distance for Endorsed. I liked his comeback from the layoff 2 back. I know that horses that finished behind him have just done okay since then, but that was just a stepping stone race. It was a prep. I didn't like the trip that he got in the Santa Anita Handicap last time. He was just out wide the entire way in no man's land. That was a pretty moderate pace, and he was just racing without cover, too far back at the end of a pretty compact field. I just didn't think he ever was really in the right spot that day. I like him getting back to this distance, the class relief. And if he's 7-2, personally, I think that's a good price on him because in a lot of ways, for me, he's the most likely winner of this race. So I do like Endorsed. I have no problem with Bankit. You know that he's a horse that I've liked in the past. It's just him, and especially Rated R Superstar. There's just these one-run deep closers, and in a big field like this, you do need some racing luck to get the right kind of trip from that far back. So I'm always a little bit wary of taking horses like that, but I'll definitely use them along with my top pick in exotics.
Yeah, and Bankit, the horse who finished second in that race, was Improbable, who we will undoubtedly talk about a little later. I don't really have any big knocks on Endorsed. I just don't like the post at this 1.16 distance, particularly for a horse who hasn't shown much early speed at all. I just have a feeling he's going to get shuffled a little bit too far out of it. If you switch posts with him and Rated R Superstar, I'd prefer him over that one. But that's just the way I see the race playing out.
One more horse that I want to just briefly mention at a big price in this race that I want to use somewhere is the number 5 Lombo. When you look at it on the surface of things, you would say, oh, well, he was tracking a slow pace last time, so I want to downgrade that performance. And indeed, his TimeformUs speed figure is downgraded a little bit from the final time number. But I think it's worth remembering that, if the reporting is correct, that was his first start as a new gelding. And he just ran a completely different kind of race than he had before. He really finished off strongly. He ran his final 1/8 mile in 11.99 seconds that day. Just showed the kind of finishing kick that we hadn't seen from him prior to that. This is a much tougher spot, but I think it's possible that Lombo's turned a corner now as a new gelding. So I don't want to totally dismiss him. He'd have to step up in class, but he's one that I would use underneath because I do think he's going to be a double-digit price in this race.
Yeah, I've got no problem with Lombo, the first time gelding thing last time out. And I think that is accurate. It shows up just before that race, and he did run much improved. And I agree with you about the slow pace. It's kind of irrelevant in this field. He's not even a horse that really, when he runs his best, has done. He doesn't have to have the lead. He usually shows some speed, but I think the final time is more of an indication of his ability.
All right, let's jump to the end of this card, and we're going to discuss the last 6 races, all consecutively leading up to the finale, beginning with race 9. And like the one we just talked about, this is another optional claiming race, going a mile in the 16th. You've got some horses with stakes form that are dropping back down into allowance company for this race. And I think you really have to start the conversation with the number 3 Fearless, who is likely to be the favorite in this race. We talked about it when we recapped the New Orleans Handicap on the TimeformUs Pacecast, how this horse didn't get a great trip. Really, just everything went wrong for this horse right from the start.
Yeah, it did. This is another full field, pretty evenly matched on paper if you get past Fearless. But if you think Fearless is going to run back to the race he ran 2 back, he's going to win this race. What stuck out to me is he ran as fast, or at least nearly as fast as all the others in the field. Last time out, he got a 111 TimeformUs speed figure, which is basically what the rest of these run on their good days. And he did that despite the trip we talked about. So I think he's really the one to beat for sure. I don't have a whole lot of clever opinions in this race. I think rotation is dangerous. He's a 4-year-old. I like you. He came off a pretty long layoff, ran a really good second. So I think he's one you could use in here. And the only other one that really jumped out at me is Lord Guinness. He's a bit of a price if I was looking to use a price horse. I think you can totally draw a line through his last race. It was a wide trip. He was in over his head. And this is a good spot where his past figures fit really well with the rest of the field outside of, like I said, Fearless's race 2 back.
Yeah, we view this race actually pretty similarly. Fearless, I mean, I didn't love him coming into the New Orleans Handicap last time, but I think my estimation of him actually rose coming out of that race because rewatching it back, I mean, I think I faulted Florent Geroux maybe too much after that race because he really tried to hustle this horse out of the gate. The horse was just a little bit flat-footed at the start, and he kind of just got sandwiched into the rail. I mean, it wasn't Florent's fault, and he tried to get him into position after that, but with a big, long striding horse like this, it's hard to really put him up into traffic, and he just continually kept getting shuffled back. He took the worst of that trouble at mid-stretch when Chess Chief was legitimately disqualified for coming in at the end of that race. So I do think that if Fearless gets back to his better races, he's going to win this race. That 3-1 morning line seems like a dream because I think he's going to be more like 7-5 in this race. And he really should be based on the speed figures that you noted. I mean, he had trouble last time and still ran as fast as everybody else. I agree with you about Lord Guinness. I think he's very interesting at a price in this race. He got just a terrible trip last time in the Oaklawn Mile. He broke legitimately slowly, had to rush up after that. It was not the smartest move to rush into the fastest part of the race. And he did drop out pretty early with about a half mile to go, but I think he had a right to. And like you said, he's got prior speed figures that make him a contender. So I'll use him at a price. The only other horse that I really want to give consideration to, because I do think Fearless is likely to win this race, is the number 6 Proverb. I know that his recent speed figures don't make him quite as fast as some others, but last time out, I think he was much, I don't want to say much the best, but his margin was greater. His margin of superiority, I should say, was greater than that neck finish would suggest because he was in traffic for a lot of the far turn coming to the top of the stretch. Once he got through, he beat that field pretty easily. And 2 back, I just didn't like the ride at all. I thought Tyler Bays sent him inside right into the back, some tiring runners, and he probably should have won that race. So I think Proverb's in better form than it appears. He's got to make a pretty big advancement on the speed figure scale to beat this field, but I do think he's going to take a step forward.
Yeah, the only other thing I'll add, the reason I wouldn't actually single Fearless in here and mentioned a few others, it's just because of that inside post. And like you said, it takes him a little bit to get into stride. And he could kind of face a similar trip, maybe hopefully not as bad as he did at the fairgrounds. But, you know, I could envision a scenario where things just don't go his way again. So that's the reason I've mentioned some others.
No, I think that's fair. I'm not going to single Fearless, but he's definitely, if I'm doing like an ABC kind of wager, it's definitely the kind of race where for me, he'd be the only A and I'd use some Bs and Cs as backups. Let's move on to another one of those optional claiming races. Again, going a mile and a 16th. It's the 10th race on the card. This one, though, is for the 3-year-olds. And this is a pretty interesting field. You've got a number of runners that are dropping out of stakes company. Some that are actually moving up in class out of maidens, others that have run in some pretty fast allowance races. It's just a good mix of horses, some that we've been familiar with from the Derby preps that we've already seen. where do you want to start in this race? How are you looking at it?
I guess when I handicapped it, I started with Ginobili. You have to look at his race 2 back against Nadal. If he runs that race, he's going to win this race most likely. But you have questions with him. He's going 2 turns for the first time. I'd like to hear your take on his breeding. I've never thought he ran like a horse that wants 2 turns. Doesn't look like he's bred that way to me. So maybe I would use him defensively. And that's considering, I mean, his last race I know he had a little trouble, but it was pretty bad. He just didn't do much running at all as a 4 to 5 favorite. Like you said, he didn't break bad. He got shuffled, but I would have liked to seen a little more out of him. Again, it's not a race I have a whole lot of clever opinions. I think Candy Tycoon is definitely a contender in here. The 7 horse is either first, I think he's a second choice on the morning line. Just like we talked about in the last race, I'm putting a line through his Florida Derby. He drew outside that day. He got caught wide around that first turn going 1.125 miles at Gulfstream. And that's basically a death sentence. He was wrapped up on early, didn't really ever make a dent. But his races before that make him pretty good in here. He ran a distant second in the Fountain of Youth, the Ete Indian, a horse who's proven to be a very good 3-year-old. So I prefer Candy Tycoon over Rushy, who's actually the morning line favorite in here. He comes in with the best speed figure last time. He ran a 112, but that was, to me, the ultimate kind of suck-up speed figure. He was beaten by 10 lengths that day by Charlatan in a small 5-horse field. Today he draws outside. It's going to be a much tougher. So he's a favorite that I want to beat, and I'd want to go with Candy Tycoon. I don't know why I'm struggling with that one, but Candy Tycoon of the lower priced horses.
Yeah, it's funny that you began with Ginobili because he's the horse that I think was most difficult for me to assess in this race, and I ended up liking him more than I thought I would when I first started looking at this race because Ginobili, I think when you first start to assess his form, you say, oh, well, he ran that big figure second time out going 6 furlongs, so he probably is a one-dimensional sprinter. But, I mean, he did show a good deal of stamina to hold on for second in that San Vicente, dueling with Nadal the entire way. And it's not like this race is 1.25 miles. It's just 1.16 miles. And he's drawn a really good inside post position in a spot where his 2 main pace rivals, Prodigious Bay and Rushy, they're way on the outside and moving into that first turn pretty quickly. I think Ginobili is going to have all the best of it. And the big issue with Ginobili last time was that he wasn't fast enough to keep up early, going 6 furlongs against some really fast horses. Well, this time going 1.16 miles, he's going to be able to make the early lead going a more moderate pace. And when I take apart his pedigree, it's not a classic distance pedigree for sure, but Munnings can definitely get horses to go as far as 1.16 miles. Munnings is actually kind of like his sire Speightstown, a much more versatile sire than you might think on the surface. And on the dam side, while again, it's not pedigree that I want going 1.25 miles, his dam was arguably best going distances of 1 mile to 1.16 miles. Actually, both of his dam's wins came routing, going 2 turns. So I think there is evidence that Ginobili will ultimately be best going a distance of about 1 mile. And that's kind of like what this race is. So I ended up making Ginobili my top pick because he earned that big speed figure 2 back. Thought it was the wrong situation last time, and I think he might be in the right spot here. When I first looked at this race, I thought I would like Candy Tycoon more than I ultimately did. I agree with everything you said about his Florida Derby trip last time. It was definitely not ideal. But at the end of the day, Candy Tycoon is not that much faster than a lot of other horses in this race that are going to be bigger prices. So while he has those class lines, especially from 2 back, that make him a major player here, I just think he's going to have to step up and run a faster speed figure this time. Rushy, I agree with you about that kind of being a suck-up number last time against Charlatan, although other horses, I mean, the number does make sense for them in that race. And his maiden victory 2 back, I know it didn't come back that fast with just a 103 TimeformUs speed figure, but we actually talked about the race that Divine Armor, who was second that day, and Kissed the Day Goodbye, who was third, came back and ran next time on the Pacecast. That was a maiden race that got a huge 112 TimeformUs speed figure when Kissed the Day Goodbye was first and Divine Armor was second. So maybe that maiden victory by Rushy is actually better than it seems. And I actually think he is the horse to beat in this race. So for me, I'd kind of go 2-11-7 and maybe throw in a bit of background, the number 12, who I liked as a long shot on the Oaklawn Stakes last time. maybe I'll give him one more chance on a fast track to get into the trifecta.
I just want to say one more thing about Ginobili. When I gave my analysis, I'm assuming he is not going to be 7-2. I actually think he'll probably wind up going off the favorite in this race. So I was kind of slanted that way. If he went off 7-2, I would certainly make him my top selection in this race. I don't have any doubt that race against Nadal was legitimate. And I mean, he was beaten less than a length by a horse that's going to be the favorite in the second division and probably a pretty heavy favorite. So, I don't want to come across, it's mostly I don't know what to do with him, and I want to see the price. But my thought is he'll wind up the favorite in here. I guess we'll have to see on that one.
Yeah, I don't know. I would lean more towards Rushy being the favorite with Joao Rosario being named and Mike McCarthy just really firing on all cylinders everywhere. But we'll see. I think it'll be close between those two. I do think one of those two horses will be the shortest price in this spot. Let's move on to the next race. It is the first division of the Arkansas Derby, grade 1, going 1 1/8 for the 3-year-olds. And this definitely is the weaker division of the two races, just from a depth standpoint, but it might contain the most talented 3-year-old out there in the number 1 Charlatan. We've talked about both of this horse's races previously on the Pacecast. He's just really fast, and he proved last time that he can get 2 turns, can go at least a mile. Maybe the extra furlong is going to be his undoing, but I'm not really seeing it. I've been really impressed by this horse, and drawing the rail, especially now with the announcement that Shoot or Shoot is coming out of this race, just seems like he's going to have a really favorable pace situation, and I can't try to beat him.
Yeah, I'm the same. I posted on Twitter the top 3-year-old figures of the year so far, and Charlatan had the top 2. You're not normally going to see that in a horse who hasn't even run in a stakes race. We saw that with Justify a few years ago. I don't know if he's going to be a Justify type horse that went on to win the Triple Crown, obviously, but he is certainly very talented. He draws an easy field. He draws the rail, which is only going to help his speed. And like you said, with Shoot or Shoot going to be scratched, there just isn't anybody to really challenge him. And I'm like you, I'm not going to take him on. If I play the race, maybe I will try some exactas and tries, and I would do that using Basin underneath. He's a horse we talked about his trip the last couple times. I definitely think he's going to run better than we've seen from him the last couple times. And it's more a case of not so much that I love Basin, but that I don't like the others who are likely to be bet. I mean, Gouverneur Morris, he's just okay for me. And Ano d'Or just looked terrible last time and is probably going to be like the 3rd choice in here. So I would probably build my tickets with Charlatan on top and Basin in the 2-3 spots and hope to get those favorites out of not the favorites, but the other horses likely to take money out of there.
Yeah, I wish I had more to say about this race, and I wish I had a more exciting take, but I just want to echo everything you said. I think Charlatan is faster than these horses, and the other horse that I would use is Basin, and I almost wish that Basin had drawn in the other division because he'd have been a bigger price in the second division, and in this division, he's just kind of the obvious other horse along with Gouverneur Morris, and you're just not going to get that much value playing exactas 111. I mean, I think he'll be a bigger price than Gouverneur Morris, so I still think that's the right bet in this race. But it's not like you're going to make a killing hitting that exacta. Just to kind of wrap up Charlatan, I mean, I don't know what this horse is ultimately going to turn out to be, but he's been really impressive. And I've been watching some of his recent workouts on XBTV. I mean, he just seems like he's coming into this race in excellent form. And I'm excited to see the kind of performance that he puts forth and comparing the final times of these 2 Arkansas Derbies, assuming that he gets the job done, because he really could be an exceptional talent.
Yeah, he could. And all you have to do is look at the horse that he just dusted his first time out in Shoot or Shoot. He's come back to win twice. He broke his maiden impressively with a fast figure. He came back and won at Oaklawn with another fast number. So, I mean, he wasn't beating chopped liver there. Shoot or Shoot can run. It's a shame he scratched out of this spot, but I don't think there's much doubt that we're looking at real serious talent in Charlatan.
Moving on to the second of the 3 stakes races on this Oaklawn Saturday card. It's the 12th race, the Oaklawn Handicap, grade 2, going 1 1/8. Another 14-horse field. And to me, this is the most interesting race we're going to discuss because I think there are a lot of ways to go. It'll be interesting to see how they bet this race because we talked about the morning line a little bit. The line maker had Combatant as the slight favorite. I mean, let me be honest. This would be a tough race for anybody to make a morning line for, because you've got horses coming from a multitude of different directions. A lot of horses that seem to be in good form coming into this race. Personally, I think the horses that are going to vie for favoritism are Mr. Freeze and By My Standards, both horses who posted blowout victories last time. But there are a lot to consider. How are you looking at this race? To you, who's the horse to beat from your perspective?
From my perspective, it's Mr. Freeze. If I could get the 6-1 morning line on him right now, I'd unload. Not saying he's a lock, because it's a very tough, deep field. There's plenty of speed horses in here, but he's just that good right now. I can't believe he'll be that kind of price. That said, this is a race. It's a grade 2 in name only. This field itself could help this race get elevated to a grade 1. It's that strong. But yeah, I think Mr. Freeze is the guy to beat. He ran that good second in the Pegasus. He came right back with that romping win at Gulfstream. And it looks like he's really turned a corner. He's run some huge speed figures. I think it was a 133 last time. So for me, he is the horse to beat.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the only real question with Mr. Freeze is the mile and 1/8 distance, because he's done his best. I mean, he's won more races going a mile, but I think the mile and 1/8, I mean, he's run just fine. I mean, it's no disgrace losing to a horse like Tom's D'Etat going that distance. So I do think he is the horse to beat in this race. He's going to face some pace pressure because you've got Warrior's Charge, who really is a need the lead type to the outside, but Mr. Freeze has shown that he can stalk, so I'm not too concerned about that. What do you make of By My Standards, who is a horse that won a New Orleans Classic last time, that did not come back to get the fastest speed figure, but he was visually impressive in doing it. I guess he's got more potential to do better here. I don't know. I have trouble taking horses at short prices that got such perfect trips last time.
Yeah, I'm against By My Standards. He's one of a couple. I think I have more negative opinions than positive ones in here, and By My Standards is probably the top one. He's looked great. We talked about how good he looked on the Pacecast a couple times, and I think we both actually liked him last time, but this is a whole new ball game. He draws outside. He's not going to get that cushy trip where he gets to go slow. No, but he doesn't have to be on the lead. He's obviously rated just off of it, but it's hard to picture a horse like him just making that huge step. And if he were 8 or 10-1, maybe I'd consider it, but that's not going to happen. So I don't want any parts of him in here. The other one I'm against for sure is Combatant. He obviously won the big cap last time, but he won it with a speed figure on our scale of only 120 for a race that has a par of about 130. So that kind of tells you it was a really weak division of the Santa Anita Handicap. It just kind of fell into his lap. Multiplier is the horse he nosed out, a horse who had done very little good running on the dirt before. So I'm against him as well. So for me, and the other horse I have to mention, I even put this in capital letters, is I will not bet Tacitus. I'm not saying that he can't win, but I jumped off that bandwagon a couple races ago, and I'm not getting back on until he proves me differently. But obviously, I think the other horse we have to talk about is Improbable. He is the main danger to me, to Mr. Freeze. He draws outside again, but as you noted on Twitter, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I thought that meant he would load last. A trainer there, Jason Barkley, actually kind of filled me in that he will load next to last. That's the way they do it at Oaklawn Park. They kind of save the horse in the middle for last to make sure that the starter gets a good look at him. But, it's got to be better drawing there than it does the 1 hole or the 2 hole where he'd be sitting in the gate a while and has been known to act up. But the problem with him is he's once again going to have to work out a trip from that far outside post. But he is a very talented runner, and I think he's the main danger for Mr. Freeze.
Yeah, I'm going to make Improbable my top pick in this race. I know that some people are concerned about the post position, but like I was saying on Twitter, I actually think it's good for this horse. You've got a long run to that first turn. I mean, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other, whether he's loading last or second to last, because it's definitely better than breaking from the rail or the 2 post, which he's done many times. And he's acted up in those situations and almost cost himself, or probably has cost himself, a number of races because of that. It's exactly the same situation as last time in the Oaklawn Mile, when that day he also loaded second to last. And He was pretty well behaved that day. I know he maybe bucked one time, and Drayden Van Dyke briefly had to get off, but he held it together pretty well. So I think if it's a similar situation here, Improbable is going to be dangerous. I've seen a lot of talk that people are saying Improbable can't get the mile and an eighth distance, and he's just a pure miler. Do I think Improbable is maybe a little bit better going a mile than a mile and an eighth? Maybe, but people sometimes get way too caught up in whether or not horses win races or not. And yes, Improbable has won races going a mile. But if you look at his races that he's run going a mile and an eighth, they're actually some of the best races that he's ever run. I mean, he gave Omaha Beach a real scare in this Arkansas Derby last year. He would have won the Pennsylvania Derby if not for drawing an inside post position and acting up in the gate and then getting sent down inside in the stretch and finding traffic there. I mean, he was the best horse that day. So I think Improbable really has run well enough to win this race going a mile and an eighth in the past. And I just think if he gets any kind of if he can get over to at least the 3 or 4 path from the outside post, he's just going to be tough to beat in this race because he's obviously in good form right now. As for some of the others that you mentioned, I'm probably a little bit more willing to give Tacitus another shot than you are. I'm not going to make him a top pick in this race. I'll use him mostly underneath, but I mean, Tacitus has still run a number of TimeformUs speed figures that are faster than a lot of other horses in this race. And I don't know what kind of price he's going to be. I'd imagine he's the second or third choice in this race, but I can't totally count him out. I'm not going to put all my eggs in his basket, assuming he's going to win, but I'll definitely use him. Others that I guess we should mention, I have the same opinion as you about By My Standards and Combatant. I was surprised that some other people who make morning lines that I respect were saying that they thought Combatant would be the second choice in this race. I don't know. When I looked at this race before seeing the line, I thought Combatant would be an 8 or 10 to 1 shot because to me, his Santa Anita handicap is just not nearly good enough. So I was going to go 14, 9, 4, 12 for my picks in this race. And I thought it was really among those horses.
Yeah, a couple things on Improbable. You mentioned the mile and an eighth. It certainly is better for him in this spot than a mile drawing far outside. You get a pretty good run to the first turn going a mile and an eighth at Oaklawn. So I don't think it's going to be an issue in here. I was going to ask you about the morning line. I don't think there's any way in the world he's going to go off a longer price than Combatant. Well, he's 8 to 1 on the morning line. I think you could probably reverse those two and it would be more accurate. A couple other horses I wanted to mention in here. Warrior's Charge is always a horse I've liked, but he's a horse who's just never done anything when he hasn't made the lead. He's got pretty easy leads, particularly fast. So while I think he might be a pace presence, I don't really consider him a contender in here. If I were going to pick a long shot, I was going to use it would be Tax, just because he's a horse who has run some really big figures in the past. He ran a 130, won second to Performer in the Discovery. And if you're willing to just put a line through the Pegasus where he had a tough start and just didn't do much running, you're putting some faith in Danny Gargan, but he's as hot as any trainer out there right now. And Taxos has those back races that I like.
And if I was going to pick a long shot, we're spending a lot of time on this race, but there's a lot to talk about. If I was going to pick a long shot, and when I say that, I mean to be like my 5th choice in this race in terms of ordinals, but it would be the number 2 Trophy Chaser. You know that I've been pretty skeptical of this horse improving going longer distances, but after the last race, I can't deny it. He ran really well last time, basically as well as he did in that optional claiming victory 2 back. So maybe Trophy Chaser has just wanted to go 2 turns all along. So I would use him underneath in this race because it feels like he might be one that slips through the cracks. Let's move on to the second division of that Arkansas Derby, the 13th race on this card, the final stakes race we're going to talk about. And this is definitely the more competitive of the 2 Arkansas Derbies. But once again, Bob Baffert does have the horse to beat, as Nadal is the morning line favorite. I'd imagine he's even going to get bet down off that 5 to 2 morning line because he really does seem like the horse to beat in this race. He's undefeated. He's sustained some challenges recently and he's turned them away. I do think he is the most likely winner of this race.
I do as well. As you said, this is a deeper division than the first division, but Nadal's been really good. I've got no knocks on him other than the fact I'm a huge Novak Djokovic fan, so I just can't bring myself to root for this horse. But, you know, he's just been good. He hasn't quite been as flashy as Charlatan. He hasn't run quite as fast. but he's done everything he had to do. I think he'll be challenged early, but he's been challenged early before. He battled with Ginobili in that sprint and was able to beat him. He went really fast last time in the Rebel and was able to keep going at the end. So I have no doubt he is the horse to beat in here, and I'm certainly not going to go too heavily against him. Some of the others I don't particularly like in here. Wells Bayou, who's actually turning back in distance out of that Louisiana Derby. He draws the far outside. The post isn't going to do him any favors, and neither is Nadal. King Guillermo is kind of the wild card in here for me. He was a horse who, after winning the Tampa Derby, was going to train up to the Derby off that win. Well, obviously, he wound up in a different Derby as they're not running the Kentucky Derby, but it's a possible second choice. That's not a race I think was very strong. The figure was okay for his win. He got, I think it was a 119, which is right up there with Nadal, but it just wasn't the same quality field. I looked at the runbacks in that race, and nobody's really done a whole lot since. I think the field's a combined 0 for 5, only one weak third in there. So I had a hard time coming up with any alternatives to Nadal. I think he's the most likely winner, and he'd be my top pick. One horse I will use underneath, I'm going to give him another chance, is Silver Prospector. I loved him in the Southwest. I think you did too, if I remember right. He didn't run very well in the Rebel. He did have some excuses. I don't think it completely, you can write the performance off as just a bad trip. There was more to it than that, but it was also on a sloppy track that maybe he didn't care for a lot. And I still think he's got some real talent and is one that is going to run much better today. I don't know that will be good enough to beat Nadal, but it will be a good effort. The only other horse I really am considering is Farmington Road. He's a horse who seems to be coming into his own lately. He's got some work to do on the speed figure scale. When he was second in that Oaklawn Stakes a couple back, he only got a 111 TimeformUs, but I like the way he did it, and I just like his pattern. He's a horse that seems to be getting better every time. I don't think the outside post is a big deal for him because I think this field's going to be strung out a bit. He should be able to get 2 or 3 wide around the turn and be fine.
I'll be interested to see what kind of trip Nadal works out in this race and how they kind of sort themselves out early, because Wells Bayou breaking from the outside, I would imagine that Florent Geroux really is going to send him hard, because of all the horses in this race, I think Wells Bayou is that quintessential need the lead type. And Nadal, while he's been battling for the lead in all of his races, I think he's probably a bit more rateable than we've seen so far. I've watched a lot of his recent workouts, and Bob Baffert has been giving him a target in the morning quite a bit. If you watch any of those workouts, I mean, you could see this horse is just, I mean, a picture of health at the moment. He's just been really dazzling in some of those morning drills. So I think we're going to see a good performance out of Nadal, and I'm not going to be shocked if Joao Rosario tries to take him slightly off the pace. Not that he's going to be back in mid-pack, but I think we might see him rating just off a horse like Wells Bayou in the early going. I agree. I just think Nadal is a little bit faster than these, and I think he still has room for improvement. I liked his effort last time. I know that Accession, who he beat, is no great shakes, but Accession had just a perfect trip that day, and Nadal was so game to turn him away late. So I think he's the horse to beat in this race. I'm with you on Wells Bayou. I'm also kind of like you, skeptical of King Guillermo. I know we got a figure last time that puts him basically on the same level as Nadal, but that wasn't the strongest race. He got a perfect trip that day. This is a barn that doesn't ship out of Florida too often, so I'm a little skeptical of him. Really, if I had to choose a horse to put underneath Nadal, it'd be Storm the Court. I know that Storm the Court is a horse that a lot of people like to hate on because he was that upset winner of the Breeders' Cup last year, and people say that, oh, he's just disappointed so far as a 3-year-old. But I mean, if you look at his speed figures, Storm the Court has basically run the same number that he ran in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile in both of his 2020 starts so far. Sure, he was beaten by Nadal 2 back, but 7 furlongs is a bit short for him. And Authentic, I mean, he's one of the top 3-year-olds out there. I know Bob Baffert has chosen not to run him in this race, but that San Felipe was one of the strongest preps that we saw. And I don't think Storm the Court lost anything in defeat being third that day. So I'm not going to be shocked if he finishes second here. So I'll mostly play a 5-3 exacta and maybe use a little Silver Prospector underneath for all the reasons that you mentioned.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned about Nadal. As far as the pace goes, our pace projector shows him on the front and it shows that we think the pace is going to be fast. But I'm more in your camp on this one. I don't think Nadal is a horse who has to have the lead. Obviously, he went for the lead last time because he drew the rail in the Rebel on a sloppy track. In the San Vicente, it was just a sprint and a short field. There was only really 2 horses that did much running that day. So I'm with you. I don't think he's a horse that has to have the lead. Maybe he'll let Wells Bayou clear. My issue with Storm the Court, and I agree with what you said, he's basically run pretty good this year, is that we've never really seen him pass a horse since his debut. I'm not sure going long that he's not a horse that doesn't want the lead. It's possible he can. Maybe he'll raid in behind horses here. He gets a good post for it, but I'd need to see it first personally.
All right, let's wrap things up by moving on to the final race of the day on Saturday, and it's a doozy. Craig, remind me of what the name of this race is again.
They call it the Trails End. It's the last race they run every meet at Oaklawn. It used to always be on, in April, back when the Arkansas Derby was that day. But I'm pretty sure last year they moved it to the closing of the meet, which was the Oaklawn Invitational on Derby Day. Somebody can quote, can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was moved, and it's always going to be the last race of the meet. It's at 14 furlongs, I guess it is, 1 3/4. 14 furlong race. So they basically start where the 6 furlong race goes, and they race to the wire, and then they go around again.
So it's hard to know where to start in a race like this because so many of the horses in this field are trying this distance for the first time. We do have 2 horses that both have experience going this far, probably, or I believe, in this specific race in years past, and both of them have actually won at this distance, those being the number 10 and 11. But the favorite on the morning line is the number 5, Carlos Sixes. And if we're just looking at things from the terms of who's in the best form right now, I guess it is Carlos Sixes, but he does have to answer the distance question.
He does. I won't pretend to be an expert on this races. I will most likely spread in this if I'm playing pick 4s, pick 5s, even pick 3s, because I do have some opinions in the earlier races. What I generally do is look at the horse's late pace ratings, and it served me pretty well over the years. Horses stretching out from those 1/16 races almost never do any running. Now, the difference this year is, at least the last couple years, I think they had a prep race for this one, where the horse, even a series where maybe they ran 1 3/16 and they ran 1.5 miles and kind of worked their way up to that. But they haven't had that this year. But for me, I'm going to lean on the horses that have shown late running styles. I'm certainly going to use the 10 and 11 horses who have won at this distance before. I'm going to use the 12, She Might Tell, who's actually a mare in here, but she comes running late. And even there was another one. Stuart Hall, who's definitely a horse going to be a bit of a price, but he's a first-time claim. But I always use some prices. So I basically just look at all the top 5 or 6 late pace horses, and that's who's going to be on my ticket. And I don't make it any more complicated than that, because when I try, I usually go wrong.
Yeah, this is a difficult race to handicap because there's just so much uncertainty. I'm not going to fault your method for finding a winner in this race because you probably have had more success than I have. Carlos Sixes, he can win. He's probably going to be among the shorter prices. For what it's worth, he does have pedigree to stretch out. He's a half designed for War, who was close second in the 1.5 Pan American a number of years ago. So Carlos Sixes does have some marathon pedigree there. I'll definitely use him. I would say the horse that I would put on top is the 10, Wild About You. Like you said, he's got that high late pace rating, and he's the one that has the most experience going these longer distances. He's 1 for 1 going this 1 3/4 distance because he actually won this Trails End back in 2016, 4 years ago. He is a 10-year-old horse, so he's been around for a while. But I went back in DRF Formulator and looked at his lifetime PPs and just highlighted all of his races going 1.25 miles or farther on the dirt. And if you just isolate those races, he's made 9 starts going 10 furlongs or farther, 6 wins, 2 seconds, so 8 out of 9 in the exacta. This horse, Wild About You, is just a marathon specialist. So I'm not going to worry too much about his recent form going shorter. I think he's probably going to improve stretching out in distance. So I'll primarily focus on him, and I'll use the 5 Carlos Sixes. I'll use the 11 Rouge Diesel, and maybe a little Curlin Gray on the outside because progeny of Curlin can probably go this far.
Well, good. That should about wrap it up. And hopefully we won't talk about this one on the Pacecast, but we will have plenty other races to talk about come Tuesday.
Craig, good to talk about all these races with you. Hopefully we give out some decent opinions here and have some success betting the races on Friday and Saturday. We'll be back, as you said, to discuss all of these races when we do the recap show on the TimeformUs Pacecast on Tuesday. Remember, for now, you can always listen to us at both of these podcasts on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud. Wherever you get your podcast, just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. Thanks for listening this week, and we'll be back to recap these races on Tuesday.